Wesley Harmon was the kind of man who measured everything twice, not because he doubted himself, but because he understood what happened when you rushed a measurement and found out too late. He had spent 22 years as a civil engineer for Mecklenburg County, and in that time he had watched bridges hold and roads buckle, and the difference between the two almost always came down to something small, something overlooked, a number no one bothered to check a second time. He brought that same patience to his marriage, to his home on Caldwell Ridge in Charlotte, to the woman he had chosen at 26 years old when she was still Adele Fontaine, a pediatric occupational therapist with a laugh that started low and built, the kind of laugh that turned heads in restaurants. 38 years old now, 16 years married, 2 daughters, Piper and June, 9 and 11, who still climbed into bed between them on Saturday mornings like they had when they were small. Or they used to. For the past 11s, the Saturday mornings had been quieter. The bed had felt larger, and Adele had been somewhere else, even when she was standing right in front of him. Wesley noticed it the way he noticed everything, methodically, and later than he should have. It started with the phone. She had never been secretive about her phone before. They were the kind of couple that left devices on the kitchen counter face up, charging cables crossed, no passwords that the other didn't know. Then one Tuesday in October of the previous year, he walked into the kitchen and she closed a text thread before he could see it. Just a flicker of emotion. Probably nothing. He let it go. The week after that, she began staying later at the pediatric clinic in Dilworth. Half an hour, then 45 minutes, then an hour. She always had a reason. A parent consultation, a session that ran over, an intake evaluation that couldn't be rescheduled. Every reason was plausible. Every reason felt rehearsed. The goodbye kisses disappeared in January. She said she was fighting a cold and didn't want to pass it to him or the girls. The cold lasted 11 months. He noticed the way she flinched if he touched her shoulder unexpectedly, the way she laughed too quickly at nothing, and not at all at things that used to make her double over. The way she started sleeping on her side of the bed with her back to him, completely still, the careful stillness of someone who is not actually asleep. He told himself he was overanalyzing. He told himself that 16 years of marriage carried its own weight, and that weight sometimes showed up as distance. Then their daughter Piper came to him one evening in April while he was reviewing drainage schematics at the kitchen table. She was 9 years old and had her mother's eyes and his habit of saying the exact thing no one wanted to say. "Is Mom sick?" she asked. Wesley set down his pencil. "Why would you ask that, baby?" Piper thought about it. "She's tired all the time, and she cries in the car sometimes. I saw her through the window." He pulled his daughter onto his lap and held her there. "Mom is going through something hard," he said. "But she loves you. That part never changes." He didn't know then how literally true the first part was. By August, he had started having conversations with himself that he wasn't proud of. Not loud conversations. The kind that happen in the back of the mind while you're doing something else. While you're driving. While you're brushing your teeth. While you're lying awake. Next to someone who used to reach for you in the middle of the night and hasn't touched you in 4 months. The conversations went in circles. Something was wrong. He didn't know what. Every time he tried to ask, Adele deflected with a competent warmth that felt, somehow, like a door being gently closed in his face. The week before everything changed, Wesley made an appointment with a family attorney named Gregory Oates. He did not tell anyone. He sat in a third-floor office in uptown Charlotte and listened to a man with reading glasses and a kind face explain the process as if it were a building permit, asset separation, parenting agreements, mediation timelines. He took notes the way he took notes on everything, numbered, legible, organized. He did not file anything. He paid for the consultation and drove home and sat in his truck in the driveway for 20 minutes with the engine off. He was not angry. The anger had burned down somewhere around month 6, and what was left was something harder to name. a tiredness that went deeper than sleep could reach. The feeling of a man who has knocked politely on a closed door for almost a year and finally accepted that whatever was on the other side was not going to be offered to him. He came inside and set his keys on the counter and went through the evening routine. Dinner, homework, baths. The chapter of the novel Piper demanded be real aloud, even though she was 9 years old and perfectly capable. He kissed both girls goodnight. He washed the dishes. He went to bed. Adele was already there, her back to his side, the lamp on her nightstand still burning low. He did not say anything. He turned off his lamp and lay in the dark and thought about measurements, about what he had missed, about what he still did not know. Before we go any further, if this is your first time here, this is what Tears and Secrets is built for. The stories that don't fit cleanly into any single category. The ones that cost something to tell and something more to hear. Hit subscribe. Because what happens the following morning will change everything you think you understand about this marriage. The following Saturday, Wesley came home from a job site walkthrough earlier than expected. No particular reason. The site in Pineville had finished 2 hours ahead of schedule, and for the first time in almost a year, coming home early felt something other than an obligation. He came in through the garage, past the folded laundry Adele had left on the dryer, past the girls' bicycles, past the shelf of road race bibs that Adele used to run 5Ks and hadn't touched in 11 months. He stopped. From somewhere past the hallway, he could hear Adele's voice, quietly. The back sunroom, the one with the windows that looked out over the yard. He had built the planter boxes along that fence the summer Piper was born. He could still tell you the exact corner of each board. He moved toward the sound without deciding to. Her voice was low and careful, the voice of someone who had gotten very good at being quiet. "I can't keep doing this, Roz." A pause. "He's going to find out eventually. I know he is." Roz was Rosalind Park, Adele's oldest friend. They had been roommates at UNC Charlotte before Adele and Wesley ever met. The girls are starting to ask questions. Another pause, longer. "Piper asked me last week if I was sick." Wesley stood in the hallway without breathing. "I know I should have told him. I know that." Her voice broke on the last word, just slightly, just enough to be heard. "But I didn't know how. After his mom, after everything that happened with her last year, I couldn't do it, Rose. I couldn't hand him more of the same thing." A silence. "Then the tumor is gone." "Roz, I'm telling you." The scans from Thursday were clear. Her voice cracked completely open. "I didn't want him to know I was sick, and now I don't know how to tell him that I was, and that I'm not anymore." Wesley pressed one hand flat against the hallway wall. He stayed there for a long time. Long enough for the sunroom door to stay closed. Long enough for Adele's voice to go quiet. Long enough for the girls to come downstairs and start arguing over something in the kitchen, normal and oblivious and heartbreak-rating in their normality. When he finally moved, he went upstairs to the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed with his elbows on his knees and his face in both hands. He had spent 11 months building a case, cataloging evidence, reaching conclusions with the careful logic of a man who trusted systems. The system had told him something was wrong. The system had not been able to tell him what. What it had been was this. His wife, for 11 months, had been fighting a tumor in her left breast alone, had scheduled her own appointments, driven herself to treatments, covered her own expenses, explained her own exhaustion to no one, carried her own fear in a sunroom at the back of their house because she did not want him to feel, on top of the grief of losing his mother the previous spring, the particular dread of watching someone else he loved fight the same enemy. The anger came, briefly. It was a clean, honest anger, and he let himself feel it. Then he set it aside with the same discipline he applied to everything. Because the anger was not the most important thing in the room right now. He was going to need to understand the whole structure before he touched anything. Let's step outside the story for a moment, because what Wesley was experiencing is documented in family psychology under the concept of ambiguous loss. It was first identified by researcher Dr. Pauline Boss, and it describes the pain of losing someone who is still physically present. The person is still there. Same house, same table, same bed, but emotionally unreachable in a way that cannot be explained and therefore cannot be grieved. What makes ambiguous loss so quietly devastating is that it has no visible wound. There is nothing to point to. There is only the daily experience of reaching for someone who is still standing in front of you and not being able to close the distance. In the absence of explanation, the mind does what minds do. It builds one, and the explanation the mind builds is almost always worse than the truth. Wesley had built an explanation. It had cost him months of sleep and one appointment with a family attorney. The actual truth, that his wife had been protecting him at the cost of everything else, was not something his explanation had accounted for. He heard the sunroom door open. He heard Adele's footsteps in the downstairs hallway, careful and deliberate, the footsteps of someone navigating a house that no longer felt fully safe. He heard her stop at the bottom of the stairs. He did not move. That evening, after dinner, after Piper and June were upstairs, Wesley sat at the kitchen table, in the same chair where he had been sitting the night he took notes in a family attorney's office. He sat with his hands folded and waited. Adele came through the kitchen on her way to the back hallway. She stopped when she saw him. Something crossed her face. Not quite fear, not quite guilt. The expression of someone who has been carrying something so long they have almost forgotten what it feels like to set it down, and are now being handed the opportunity, and are not sure they can survive the relief. Wesley's voice, when he spoke, was level, not cold, the voice of a man who has already been through the worst of what he had to feel. "I came home early today," he said. "I heard you on the phone with Rosalind." Adele reached for the back of the nearest chair. She held the edge of it with both hands and stood there with her head bowed and her breathing gone short and shallow. Then she folded. She sat down in the chair with the slow, boneless motion of someone letting go of the last thing they were holding on to. The tears came without any warning, the deep, convulsive kind, the kind that have been compressed for a very long time and have finally found a seam. "I was diagnosed with a tumor in my left breast," she said. 11 months ago, right after your mother's service." Her hands were pressed over her mouth. "I had the surgery in December. Radiation through February. The results from Thursday, they were clear, Wesley. It's gone." She looked at him with red-rimmed eyes. "I should have told you. I know I should have. But your mother had just died of the same disease. I watched what it did to you. I watched you stand at the foot of her bed and not be able to do a single thing. I couldn't ask you to stand at mine." The kitchen was very quiet. Let's pause here, because what Adele just described is one of the most consistent and least discussed patterns in family psychology. It is called the protector trap. The protector trap occurs when love becomes the reason for secrecy. The person who is sick, who is struggling, who is falling, they convince themselves that hiding the fall is an act of kindness, that the most loving thing they can do is to absorb the suffering entirely, to keep it contained, to prevent the people they love most from having to feel it. The internal logic of the protector trap is not irrational. From the inside, it feels like sacrifice. It feels like devotion. But what family systems research shows, consistently and clearly, is that hidden suffering does not stay contained. It changes the texture of a home. It settles into the way a person breathes, the way they touch a doorknob, the way they go quiet at dinner when they used to fill the room with laughter. It does not disappear into silence. It transforms. It becomes distance, withdrawal, a flinch when someone touches your shoulder. Adele had hidden her illness because she loved Wesley with the full force of everything she had. And in doing so, she had almost handed him exactly what she was trying to prevent, the loss of her, just slower and without explanation. Wesley rose from his chair. He crossed the kitchen the way he used to cross rooms when the girls were newborns and crying in the middle of the night, without hesitation, without strategy, just toward. He wrapped both arms around his wife and held her while she shook. She gripped the back of his shirt with both hands and did not let go. When she finally steadied, he pulled back enough to look at her. "The scans were clear," he asked. She nodded. "Everything." "All of it?" "Full remission," she said. Dr. Kamal called me Thursday afternoon." He nodded slowly. The engineer's mind was already doing what it always did, cataloging, sequencing, finding the next load-bearing question. What did it cost? Adil looked down. "Adil, most of the emergency fund," she said quietly, "and the Savannah account." The Savannah account was what they called the savings they had set aside since Piper was born, earmarked for a beach house rental every summer. They had taken the girls to Tybee Island every July for 8 years. It had become the kind of tradition that family rituals are built on. "I didn't touch the girls' education accounts," she added quickly. "I made sure of that." Wesley set both hands flat on the table and looked at them for a long moment. Then he asked, "Who else knew?" Adil closed her eyes. "Roz knew. And my sister Camilla." A pause. "And your sister?" Wesley looked up. "Bertrice has known since February," Adele said. "I called her after my second radiation session. I needed someone in your family to know, in case anything happened, and the girls needed someone quickly. I made her promise not to tell you." He sat with that. His sister Bertrice, who had called him every 2 weeks for 11 months and asked how things were going. Who had said, twice, that he should be patient with Adele, that she was fighting something he couldn't see. He had thought she was talking about grief, about Adele processing his mother's death alongside him. He had not known his sister was telling him the truth in the only way she had been given permission to. This is where a third pattern enters the story, one that family therapists call the family secret system. When a household is facing a serious crisis, particularly one involving illness or the fear of loss, family members sometimes organize themselves around a shared silence without any single conversation in which everyone agrees. One person decides to protect the most vulnerable member of the system. Another is brought in to help carry the weight. Then another. The people inside the circle believe they are acting out of love. From their perspective, they are. But every person brought into the secret absorbs a portion of the emotional burden, and every person kept outside, Wesley, in this case, begins to feel the shape of something they cannot name. They do not know what is wrong. They only know that the air is different, that the house hums differently, that the person they reach for at night is still technically within arm's reach and somehow completely gone. That formless, sourceless anxiety, the kind that has no target and no explanation, is frequently more psychologically damaging than the truth would have been. Not because the truth is easy. The truth is not easy, but because the truth can be grieved, supported, shared, survived. The formlessness cannot. Wesley had been the only person in his own household not trusted with the truth about his own household. "I need to call Bertrice," he said. "Wesley, I'm not angry with her." He said it clearly so Adele would hear it. "I just need to hear her voice right now." He went out to the garage and sat in his truck and called his sister. The call lasted 40 minutes. Bertrice cried for the first 20. She told him everything she had been carrying. The fear every time she hung up the phone without being able to say what she knew. The nights she had almost called him anyway. The morning she had driven to Charlotte and sat in the parking lot of the Dilworth Clinic for an hour before driving home, because she did not know how to walk through that door without breaking every promise she had made. "She was so scared you'd fall apart," Bertrice said. She kept saying, "He just buried Mama. He just got through the hardest thing he's ever done. I can't be the next thing he has to survive." "She should have let me decide that," Wesley said. "I know, I told her the same thing." A long pause. "But she loves you the way Mama loved Daddy, Wesley. The way that says I would rather break myself into pieces than watch you carry 1 more pound." He sat in the truck for a long time after he hung up. He went back inside and climbed the stairs and stopped at Piper's door. The light was still on. He pushed it open. She was sitting up against her headboard with a book in her lap, wearing the expression she wore when she had not actually been reading. 9 years old and carrying things 9-year-olds should not have to carry. "Hey, Bug," he said. "Hey." She searched his face with her mother's eyes. "Is everything okay?" He sat on the edge of her bed. "How long have you known that Mom was sick?" Piper was very still for a moment. Then, "I didn't exactly know. I just thought something was wrong with her body. Not just feelings." She looked at the comforter. "She had a doctor bag in the trunk one day when I got in the car. I saw pill bottles. She put her hand over them really fast, but I already saw them." "Did you ask her about it?" "She said it was a patient's sample bag she forgot to bring inside." Piper pressed her lips together. "I didn't think that was true, but I didn't want to make her feel bad by saying so." Wesley pulled his daughter into a hug and held her there for a long time. "Mom is going to be okay," he said into her hair. "I mean that for real. She's going to be okay." Piper held on tight. "Dad," she said, her voice muffled against his shoulder. "I think she was scared you'd leave if she told you." Wesley pulled back enough to look at his daughter's face. "Why would you think that?" he asked. Piper shrugged with the weighted honesty of a child who has been thinking about something for months. "Because she looks at you like you're the most important thing she has. And when you love someone that much, you get scared of the thing that could take them away." He did not have an answer for that. He just held his daughter again and felt the full shape of what had been built in this house without his knowledge. An entire constellation of people rearranging themselves around a single woman's fear. Not selfishness, not betrayal, fear, the most ancient and human kind. Let's step outside the story once more, because what Piper named without knowing she had a name for it is something family psychology documents carefully. Children are not protected by the things adults don't say. They absorb the silence the way a room absorbs humidity, gradually, invisibly, until the weight of it is everywhere. Piper had known for months that something was wrong with her mother's body. She had carried that knowledge the same way the adults around her had taught her to carry things. Quietly and alone. Children do not need to be told the truth to feel it. They feel it in the pauses between sentences, in the way an adult's smile doesn't quite reach the eyes, in the careful, deliberate way a person moves through a room when they are conserving something. What Piper had absorbed was not information. It was worry, and worry, unaddressed, takes up space. It settles in the posture of a 9-year-old who has stopped asking questions at dinner. It shows up as unusual quietness in a child who used to fill the car with commentary for the entirety of every drive. This family had been protecting a secret, and every member of it had been changed by the shape of that secret, whether they held it or only felt it. Wesley came downstairs and found Adele sitting at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a glass of water that had gone warm. She looked up when she heard him on the stairs, and her face held the particular exposure of someone who has had all of their carefully maintained defenses removed and is not certain what happens next. He sat down across from her. "Tell me everything," he said. "From the beginning. I want all of it," she told him. It took more than an hour. She told him about the day she found the lump, a Tuesday morning in September, in the bathroom before work, matter of fact, and then not at all. She told him about sitting in her car in the parking garage at the Dilworth Clinic for 40 minutes before she could drive home, shaking hard enough that she kept both hands on the steering wheel, even though she wasn't moving. She told him about making the appointment without telling him, about scheduling the biopsy during a window when he had a project deadline and would be distracted, about the 3 days between the biopsy and the results during which she had slept approximately 4 hours and gone about the full architecture of their daily life with a precision that had nearly broken her. "The day I got the diagnosis," she said, "your mother had been gone for 6 weeks. You were still putting her things into boxes. I had watched you do that every weekend for 6 weeks." She looked at the water glass. "I could not hand you a box for me. You should have let me decide what I could hold, Wesley said. For the second time that night. I know. You had surgery in December. I drove you to a consultation about the bathroom tiles on the day you had surgery. I told Rose. She took me. I thought you were visiting your cousin that day. I know. Wesley sat with the specific strangeness of that. The day he had spent sampling grout colors while his wife was in a surgical suite 6 miles away. The day Rosalind Park had held Adele's hand in a waiting room while he debated between 2 shades of gray tile. I'm going to need you to understand something, he said finally. I have an appointment with Gregory Oates's office, a family attorney. I made it Thursday. Adele's hand stilled on the water glass. I haven't filed anything, he said. I made the appointment and I went, and I took notes and I came home, and I sat in the driveway and I couldn't get out of the truck. He looked at her directly. I need you to know what 11 months of silence cost, not to punish you, because you deserve to know the price of it, the same way I now deserve to know the price of yours. She did not speak for a long moment. When she did, her voice was barely above a whisper. There were weeks I thought about asking you for a separation, she said. He looked up. To release you, she said, before it got worse. I thought, he doesn't know what this is, he's going to draw his own conclusions. And maybe if I just let him go, let him think whatever he needs to think, he can build a life that isn't shaped by this. She pressed her hands flat on the table. But every time I got close to doing it, I couldn't. Because I still wanted to come home to you. Because the girls needed us together. Because I was terrified that if I let you go, I would not make it through the rest. Wesley stared at the table. 2 people. Same house, same wound. Both of them trying to protect the other from the cost of love, and both of them, in doing so, paying a cost that neither one should have had to pay alone. You really thought I would fall apart, he said. I thought you had already given more than one person should have to give. She met his eyes. And I was not wrong about that. I was wrong about what to do with it. A long silence. Then Wesley stood up and came around the table and sat beside her, close, the way they used to sit when the girls were small and they had survived another day. He didn't say anything. He put one arm around her and she leaned into him, and for a few minutes neither of them moved. That was enough. For right now, that was enough. Let's step outside the story one final time, because what happened in that kitchen sits at the intersection of 2 patterns family psychology consistently documents together. The first is called silent strength syndrome. The deeply ingrained belief, shaped over generations by families who survived by endurance, that showing your fear is the same as surrendering to it. That the most loving thing you can do for the people who depend on you is to hold your pain out of their line of sight. The second pattern is what researchers call the demand-withdraw cycle. One partner, sensing distance, pursues. They ask questions, scan for clues, construct theories. The other partner, overwhelmed by the thing they are concealing, pulls back further. Each withdrawal provokes a harder pursuit. Each pursuit triggers a deeper retreat. 2 people caught in a loop, each one's behavior generating the exact response they most fear. Wesley had pursued. Adele had withdrawn. Neither of them knew they were in the same loop. What finally broke it was not a confrontation. It was a Saturday afternoon, an early departure from a job site. The particular acoustic physics of a sunroom, with the window cracked open. Chance. And the specific kind of love that does not leave, even when it should. The weeks that followed were not easy, and it would be dishonest to say otherwise. Wesley called Gregory Oates's office on Monday morning and canceled the appointment. That part was straightforward. The parts that were not straightforward were the conversations. The ones they had after the girls were in bed, at the kitchen table, sometimes for 2 hours, sometimes until the sky began to lighten outside the window. Adele told him things she had not told him during 11 months of silence. What it had felt like to sit in the waiting room before her first radiation session with Rosalind on her left and an empty chair on her right where she kept not looking. What it had felt like to come home after treatments and run the bath until the water was as hot as She could stand it, and cry where no one could hear, and then come downstairs and make dinner and ask the girls about school as if the evening were completely ordinary. "Why didn't you cry in front of me?" Wesley asked her one night. She thought about the question seriously, the way she always thought about serious questions. "Because with Rose and Bertrice, I could fall apart and then put myself back together before I had to see them again," she said. "But with you, you're there every morning. You see my face before I've rebuilt anything. If I came apart in front of you, I wasn't sure I'd be able to reconstruct it by the time Piper came downstairs." "That's what I was for," he said, "for seeing the part you hadn't reconstructed yet." She looked at him. "That's the whole point," he said. "That's the only point." He told her, in return, what the 11 months had looked like from his side of the closed door. He did not spare the details: the attorney consultation, the legal pad of notes he had kept in his work bag, the Saturday mornings when he lay next to her pretending to sleep, running calculations that all came out wrong because he had the wrong variables. "I thought you'd stop choosing me," he said. "That's what it felt like. After month 6, I stopped being angry about it. I just accepted it as a thing that was happening." Adil looked at the space between their hands on the table. "I was choosing you every single day," she said. "I was choosing to keep this away from you. I thought that was the same thing." "It isn't. I understand that now." In the 3rd week, Wesley called Bertrice. He drove to her house in Huntersville on a Sunday afternoon, and they sat on her back porch for 3 hours. There was a portion of the conversation that was difficult, the portion where he told her that he needed to know, going forward, that she would tell him the truth directly, regardless of what she had been asked to protect. Bertrice listened carefully. She did not apologize excessively. She said, "I made the wrong choice. I was trying to honor what Adele needed. I should have found a way to honor you both." "I know you were trying to help her," Wesley said. "I know you know that." She put her hand over his. "But I want to say it anyway. I failed you." They sat with that, the way honest people sit with true things. He also called Rosalind. That conversation was shorter and more tangled because Rosalind had been there for the surgery, had been in the waiting room, had held Adele's hand through things that Wesley now knew he should have been there for. It was harder to be simple about that. "I'm glad she had you," he said finally. "I mean that. I'm glad she wasn't alone. She should have been alone with you," Rosalind said. "I said that to her, more than once. I know you did." They began seeing a marriage counselor, a woman named Dr. Patricia Fenn, who worked out of an office in South Park, and who had a way of sitting with complete stillness while the hardest things were being said that made it easier to say them. Not because the silence was comfortable, but because it was held. You could hear yourself in it. Dr. Fenn told them on the 3rd session, "You are not working on a damaged marriage. You're working on the habits that nearly damaged it. The marriage itself has been trying to tell you the truth for 11 months. The work is learning to listen to it." Wesley thought about that the way he thought about good engineering, as a principle that was simple enough to say in one sentence and complicated enough to build a career around. The other piece that needed tending was Piper. They sat with both girls at the kitchen table on a Sunday morning. Pancakes, the ones with the blueberries that June had insisted on since she was 4, and told them the truth in the plainest language that fit. That Mom had been sick. That Mom was better now. That Mom and Dad had been going through something hard and hadn't talked about it the way they should have. That from here forward, this family was going to be better about saying hard things out loud instead of carrying them alone. June accepted this with the equanimity of a 7-year-old who is primarily focused on whether there are enough blueberries in her pancake. Piper was quiet for a long moment. Then she looked at her mother and said, "I knew something was wrong with you." "I know you did," Adele said. "I'm sorry I let you carry that." "You don't have to be sorry," Piper said, with the considered gravity of someone who has been thinking about this for months. "You just have to not do it again." There was a silence around the table. Then Wesley laughed. A real, sudden laugh, the kind that arrived without permission. And Adele covered her face with both hands, and June looked up from her pancakes with the expression of someone who would like to understand the joke, and Piper sat back in her chair with the dignified satisfaction of someone who has said the exact right thing and knows it. That was the morning the house started to sound like itself again. It was another 3 months before things felt genuinely solid. Not solid in the sense of resolved, because some of the things that had happened during those 11 months left marks that took longer to fade, but solid in the sense of built on honest ground, the sense of knowing exactly what was underneath you. Wesley cleared the medical debt quietly, without announcement, the way he handled every logistical problem, systematically, and without requiring anyone to feel small about it. He rebuilt the Savannah account over 2 budget cycles. He did not make it a story. He simply handled it and moved forward. The Tybee Island trip that summer was the first one in 2 years. They stayed in the same rental house they had used since Piper was born, the one with the yellow shutters and the porch that faced the water. June buried her father in sand up to his chest on the second day. Piper read 3 novels. Adele sat on the porch every evening at sunset without her phone and watched the water in a way she had not been able to sit still and watch anything for 11 months. On the last evening, after the girls were in bed, she and Wesley sat on that porch in the dark with the sound of the water below them. "I had a plan," she said quietly. "If everything went well with treatment, I was going to come home and tell you everything and ask you to start over." "This is starting over," Wesley said. She leaned her head against his shoulder. "You were ready to leave," she said. Not as an accusation, a statement of something she had been sitting with. "I was ready to stop hurting," he said. "I didn't know those were different things until I heard your voice in the sunroom." She was quiet for a moment. "What would you have done?" she asked. "If the scans hadn't been clear." He looked at the water for a long time. "I would have been there," he said. "I need you to understand that. Whatever came next, I would have been there for all of it. That was always the only possible answer." Adele pressed her face against his shoulder and did not respond with words, because there were no words adequate to the weight of that sentence. He felt her exhale, slowly, completely, the way a person exhales who has been holding their breath for a very long time. They stayed on that porch until the sound of the water was the only sound. What the Harmon family learned, not in a single moment but over a season of difficult, patient, incremental honesty, was not how to return to who they had been before. 16 months of silence and fear and distance had changed them. That was simply true. What they learned was how to become something that the earlier version of their marriage had not yet known how to be. A family in which the hardest truths were allowed to take up space at the table. In which the instinct to protect was examined rather than simply followed. In which the most loving words were not always the ones that cost the least to say. Wesley used to tell young engineers on his team, "When you find a crack in a load-bearing structure, do not cover it. Understand it. Repair it properly. Because a joint that has been broken and correctly repaired is often stronger at the point of repair than it ever was before. The repair is where all of the attention went. The repair is where all of the care lives." He understood now, with 11 months of receipts, why that was true. On a Friday evening in late October, almost exactly 1 year after the first Saturday, he came home early to an empty sunroom. Wesley came through the garage door and heard the sound of his family in the kitchen. Adele's voice, Piper's voice, June's voice, overlapping, louder than they had been in longer than he wanted to calculate. Something was funny. He didn't know what. He stood in the doorway and listened. Adele looked up and saw him standing there. The laugh in her face did not go out. "You're early," she said. "Site wrapped up," he said. "Same as a year ago. Different landing." She held a hand out across the kitchen counter. He crossed the room and took it.